Hi, I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. I am doing a 24 hours readathon, so I'm going to try to read for a full 24 hours. This is Dewey's reversed readathon, which means that it starts at EST 8 p.m. and local time the clock is now 2 a.m. and then I'm going to try and go for a full 24 hours. So I'll put on my timer, counting down the full 24 hours, and I'll start reading The Deep Sea Duke by Lauren James. So this is a book where we meet Hugo and Ada, and they are trying to be accepted by Dorian's family. So that's going to be interesting. I am done with The Deep Sea Duke. This is book 2 in a series where The Starlight Watchmaker was book 1, where we follow the same characters. And in this book, used less than an hour on it, so it's fairly quick read. Young adult, maybe even middle grade, actually. So you have Hugo, Dorian, and Ada. Hugo is an android. Dorian is a form of aquatic prince, and Ada is a baby planet alien. So this goes into much more of the alien aspect of science fiction, and it does make me think about what is science fiction, as in science fiction as trappings and science fiction as something more than just trappings, because I can't really, there's nothing very speculative about this book. There is no questions about what if, how do these things impact one another. It's just an adventure put on an alien planet with a gay couple. And I can understand that you sort of want to put it in an alternative setting because it's a way of removing homophobia from the narrative. This is two boys who just fall in love with one another, and the one boy isn't afraid that the parents of the other boy will dislike him because it's a gay relationship. He's just worried that, oh, maybe they won't like me because they don't like me. So in that sense, it's very human. But what is different from this setting in science fiction and, for example, a fantasy? I don't really know, and that's sort of one of the huge discussions we very often have when it comes to science fiction. So, cute book, but really makes me think about the difference between what makes a science fiction book a science fiction book and what makes a fantasy book a fantasy book. And that's something that I really want to hear thoughts about if you have. So, book one done, and I'll go on to my next book, which is also a science fiction book, and that is Ursula Le Guin, The Word for World is Forest, winner of, this is a book that's a Hugo Award winner. The Hugo Award is a huge award about science fiction specifically, and this is about a world that is attacked, conquered, is the word they use on the back, by another race. And how do you deal with that? It's been about 2 hours and I am now done with The Word for the World is Forest. This is clearly a book that is a one-to-one analogy of imperialism, in lack of a better word, but trying to open people up to what is going on by placing it in a world that is different from our world. So by abstracting it through using aliens and alien planets, people might be open to what is actually going on and the actions that are going on. There is her father was an anthropologist, and it's clear that she is inspired by a lot of that in this work, and the analogies of different cultures. And I also really enjoyed the idea of what people are willing to do if they are backed into a corner. So, and the way that we, purely by wanting to, is able to drag each other down. So she has a lot of interesting ideas and comments on violence as a social aspect and how violence influences societies. I can absolutely understand why this has won awards. It's a wonderful writing. But as with this one, The Deep Sea Duke, I'm not really sure what the difference between this as a science fiction book and this as a fantasy. It's not really about the science. It's about just an alternative world with aliens, and with sort of a very clear analogy to human history. So there might as well have been sort of fantasy races as alien races in a lot of sense. But Ursula Le Guin has also talked about that and about the separation between science fiction and fantasy, which isn't something that she is really interested in, and that she talks more about speculative fiction. And this is very much a speculative fiction based on information that we already have, which has to do with violence in society. So, having read 2 science fiction, I'm now going over to fantasy and Neverwhere. I think that's the name of the book. I'm also now going over to audiobook because it's 4 in the morning and I just need to have something and be a bit relaxed. But that is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This is a book that I've been recommended by. I've read sort of Neil Gaiman. I've read him before, and it's going to be interesting to learn. It's going to be interesting. So I'll talk to you later. So this doesn't really. Okay, so this. Yeah. So it's about 7 o'clock in the morning. We've been doing this for 5 hours and I'm really tired. This isn't boding well, but I am going to continue and hope for the best. I'm now finished with Neverwhere, which is a story about a man called Richard who realizes that there is a fantasy world below London that he gets access to when he saves one of the inhabitants of this underworld called, which he learns about when he saves one of the inhabitants in this underworld. This book is one that he wrote in parallel with the TV series Neverwhere that he also wrote. And you can sort of tell that the book is written with the structure of a TV series. It's very episodic, and that is a good thing about my next book that I'm going to read is Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Talent. I have no idea what it's about because it just says a lot of quotes on the back. But Octavia E. Butler is a very famous author, and I'll let you know if I manage to stay awake. Tip for another readathon for over 24 hours. Walking outside is a brilliant way to wake up. And number 2 is that I am listening to this as an audiobook while I'm walking outside. And it's about a lot of parallel stories reflecting on how a charismatic leader who wants to make America great again brings on the end time, and how a group of African Americans have to deal with the consequences of that. So, as a science fiction book, sometimes we do feel like they can read the future. Just finished Butler's book that was called Parable of the Talents. This turns out to be a part of duology. It's book 2, and it's about the main character who in the first book becomes a religious leader and is then prosecuted quite severely for her religious beliefs. So there is a trigger warning for sexual assault in the book, and also abuse towards children. Very fascinating book in the sense that it discusses about religious persecution and how throughout history the church in the US has had a very active role in it, and how do you sort of navigate that as both members of the church and non-members of the church. An added aspect to this book is also that this is a science fiction. We are a part of a dystopia, and the main character has I don't really know how to call it. The sort of the common word is just being an empath, but she is more than just empath as we are today. She has supernatural empathic powers. And this is, of course, something that she is taking part in as she becomes this religious leader. So the title, Parable of the Talents, is actually from a parable from the Bible, a story told by Jesus Christ in the New Testament. And what that sort of talks about is how it's important for people to use their abilities to be able to live happy lives. So now I'm done with that. That was my 4th book. And for my next book, I am going to read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? I have this copy that is my husband's copy, that's even called Blade Runner because it's very clearly linked to the film, but it is a classic, so I'm going to read it. For 15 and a half hours now. I'm just finished Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. That is book number 5, if I've kept my count correct. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is very different from the Blade Runner film. That's probably why they even have 2 different titles. And the book is much more about connection, about depression, and how do you sort of deal with a land that is falling apart around you. So the basis is a lot of the same in both books. Earth is devastated by war. Most of the people have moved on to another planet, and androids are indistinguishable from humans, except androids don't have empathy, and empathy is what makes us human. But where the sort of film is much more a noir and sort of a mystery to it, who is an android and who isn't, that question isn't that interesting in the book. They don't really care who is and who isn't an android. They're much more interesting in, well, what does it do with people if they end up lacking empathy? And considering that Philip K. Dick did have a history of mental illness, there is absolutely a way of reading this as a way of commenting on how mental illness can mess up how you deal with empathy. Because when you're depressed, everything just flatlines. So I'm not saying that if you are struggling with your mental health, you don't have empathy, but dealing with a lot of mental illnesses does influence how you feel emotions, which also includes empathy. That's just a part of the package. And the whole idea of, for example, the wife that is struggling throughout the book with depression, and comparing her and, of course, the main character's things with the androids, and what is sort of separating us in regard to this empathy. What should we then have empathy for? Who should we have empathy for? Where does that line where is that line drawn? So, interesting book and a good supplement to the film because they are so different. Just going to say something on the last, and that is also there is a religious character that they are talking about at the end. But much more interesting, I think, is what the character is doing and what the main character ends up doing, which is pushing up a boulder and then it rolling down and then him having to push it up again. And to me, that at least alludes to the myth of Sisyphus. And what's sort of more interesting, and this is for those of you who maybe have read Albert Camus. Albert Camus had a text called The Myth of Sisyphus, where he talks about sort of what is the meaning of life, how do we get the meaning of life, and he used the allegory of the myth of Sisyphus to sort of explain that life is, in one hand, innately meaningless. So we have to create meaning out of the otherwise meaningless life. And he uses this by saying that we have to imagine Sisyphus happy while he is pushing that boulder up the mountain. So I don't know if Philip K. Dick was referring to the original myth or if he was actually alluding to Camus. But I thought that sort of talking about Camus, and especially talking about that myth and Camus' thoughts about that myth, was very fitting, considering the themes of the book. I'm going to read is a book that is going to be recommended by an author, which was harder than I thought, but I landed on Only Mine by Elizabeth Lowell. It's a romance, and it was recommended by J.R. Ward, who is a New York Times bestseller for writing romance. So this is going to be fun. I'll see you in a little bit. By Elizabeth Lowell is now chosen as a romance, kind of on a whim, because I have this prompt that I just wanted to check off, and it was more difficult to find something that fit in the timeline that I now have. But it does actually remind me of something that I need your guys' help for. I am not an avid romance reader. I am not an avid romance reader, and when I say that, it means that I have read a lot of romance, especially the last few months, because I've been doing readathons and they are readily available on my audio app, and they are sort of a quick way to sort of just get a few books under my belt. But I don't really enjoy them, and I want to understand why don't I really enjoy them. I want to sort of challenge myself to see if there are certain romances that I might enjoy, what kind of romances would that be, or just see if romance really isn't a genre that's fitting for me. But to do that, I need to read romance. So I need help finding some good databases for romance, diversely romance, so I can pick about 15-20 books and read them to then sort of try and figure out what kind, if I am a romance reader. So if any of you have any tips for where I can get sort of a bunch of romance titles that are viewed as generally good, because I want to read the good romance, not just the readily available romance, because I want to give this a shot. I want to challenge myself on this. So leave your comments down below. Thank you so much for that. We are reaching the end, and I have also come to the end for the book Only Mine by Elizabeth Lowell. And it's kind of a standard romance. It's okay. I realize that this is probably not my genre, but I am going to try and challenge myself, as I talked about. So please let me know where I can find sort of curated lists to try and challenge myself. But I do have to admit that there is something interesting with reading these books from almost a social anthropological point of view, with the fact that because this is about a rugged guy who marries the daughter of an earl, and they travel into the US and lives in the forests and on the plains. And the whole discussions they have is, will she survive roughing it out? And of course, it is possible to read that whole dynamic with women being socialized into glass cages where, oh, we have to take so good care of you, don't rough a house as a child, be very careful, oh, you poor dear. And this being sort of a way of fantasizing about, am I really as delicate as the female upbringing very often can be? So I enjoyed the book in the sense that I was able to think about a lot of these implications. And the next book I'm going to read is Early Riser by Jasper Fforde, and it's a science fiction book about society where there is winter for a long time, so people hibernate, and then you have these people who work during the winter to protect the people who are hibernating. So this is probably going to be the last book I'm going to try and read, and we'll check to see how far along I'm going to get. I am done. It's been 24 hours. Done with everything. I'm so tired. This it wasn't a bad 24 hours. I realize I'm quite rusty. I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books, 6.5 books, and just shy of 2,000 pages. And I'm now going to go to bed. And I wish you a very merry day. Thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.